In today's tutorial, we'll knit the easygoing knit pullover by yarnspirations.com. Welcome back to another Yarnspirations tutorial. I'm your host, Kristen Mangus of GoodKnitKisses. Let's get started. In today's tutorial, you'll need a bulky number 5 weight yarn. We're using Bernat Roving in color Clover. Today's pattern is the easygoing knit pullover, and we'll work the two main stitch patterns for this sweater, the twisted ribbing for the cuff and the texture pattern for the main stitch pattern on the sweater. We'll need a bulky 5 yarn in the Bernat Roving. You'll need a US 10.5 or 6.5 millimeter needle. I'm using a shorter cable just to get and obtain the gauge and make an initial sample, but you'll want to get a cable that's much longer. This is an interchangeable one, and this will be for your main sweater. You'll also want to get 2 stitch holders. This size may be a little too small to hold all your stitches depending upon your sweater size. So you might want a contrasting color, a smoother yarn. I'm just using some scrap Caron 1-pound yarn here. And you'll also need a tape measure, and the tape measure is to measure yourself for your sweater or the person you're going to make it for, and also to obtain your gauge. So you'll need those things. Gather your supplies, and I'll see you in a moment. To get your free pattern, go to the link below and click it to get to yarnspirations.com and download the easygoing knit pullover. Be sure and print out your copy so that you can make your own notes for your size of sweater. The easygoing knit sweater actually works from the bottom up. So this is a twisted rib cuff here, and you work the back of the sweater first and then the front. Then you go up to the neck and shape it, work on the shoulders and the sleeves, and then come back to finish and put this beautiful cowl neck on it. And so we're going to show you how to do that in a longer knit along. Right now in this tutorial, we're going to work on the main stitch pattern for the sweater and the cuff. The cuff will be used on the bottom of, the ribbing is going to be on the bottom of the sweater and on the cuffs of the sleeve. Let's get started. Once you have your pattern, you want to download it, print it, and go to the second page and to this top left area here, and it's talking about 2 different sections of pattern. We're going to work on this part here, which is the twisted ribbing, and this part here, which is the texture pattern. So first, let's work on the twisted ribbing right now. Okay, we're going to cast on to make this twisted ribbing, and then we'll continue it on and make this nice big sample. It's about a 6x6. You'll be able to measure this and make sure that the sizing works out for you. You definitely want to measure and check your gauge so that you get a sweater that's not way too big or way too small. So we're going to do a long tail cast on. We're going to cast on about 28 stitches. So I pulled out about 28 inches or 70 centimeters for my long tail, and then I'm going to put a slip knot in here. Just wind around my finger, take the back over the front, take the back over the front again, and put that on my needle. And I'm going to put the tail part towards me, actually, this part of the tail, and then the ball is at the back. And this is just how I do it. And if you need a video on that, I'm sure we've got one on the Yarnspirations channel. I've also got it on GoodKnitKisses. So we're doing the slingshot method or long tail cast on. I'll do the first couple of stitches slower just in case you haven't done it before, because this is on the easy stitch pattern size. This whole pattern is on the easy side. So we're going to put that in our slip knot here, hold our yarn in our left hand, split that. The ball yarn is at the back and the tail is at the front. We're going to scoop it up from our thumb and go down through where our finger is, and then go down where the thumb is, and then tighten that up a little bit. Okay, go up through the thumb, down where the finger is, and then down again with the thumb, and then that pulls off, and then you can just tighten that up a little bit. Okay, so you're just going to continue on in that manner until you have 21 stitches on your needle. I'll see you in a moment. We've cast on, and now we want to turn our work over. This is my tail here. It's a little long, but you can cut this off after a while. It's better to have a longer tail to begin with, and then you can cut it and manage it rather than be too short. So we're going to flip it over, and I want you to mark that we are on the right side for row 1. I'm just going to take a little stitch marker and put it in the front of one of these little purl bumps. It doesn't matter which one. I'm showing this one. This is the right side as well. Now, if this is a easy pattern, and it does work with knit and purl stitches, but it also works with knit through the back loop. Now, if you've never knit through the back loop, it's a little bit different than a regular knit stitch. Normally a knit stitch is going to go in through this stitch here and knit around and pull through, okay? But we're actually going to twist the stitch. These stitches back here are actually twisted, and what we do, instead of going through the front of the leg of the stitch, we're actually going to go to the back. So it's called knit in the back loop. We're going to wrap around just like we normally would and pull through a loop like we normally would, but it twists that on here. Okay, so then the next stitch is actually going to be a purl because this is a ribbing. So we're going to yarn forward and then purl this stitch by going through the front of that leg there, yarning over and pulling through. Now if you need slower videos, I do have some on my channel, and there should be some links down below for you. So now we're going to the back here, or we're going back to knit in the back loop. So instead of the front, we go back here, yarn over, pull it forward. You've got yourself a loop. Now we want to purl, yarn forward, purl that stitch. Okay, so you're just going to continue working back and forth, knitting through the back loop and then purling. Okay, continue on until you are at your last stitch, which should be knit through the back loop, and I will join you for the second row. Okay, at the end of our first row, just a reminder, once you've purled, go to the back. If you do not go to the back, you'll create a yarn over and increase your stitch count. So if you're not familiar with doing ribbing as often, make sure after you're done with this last stitch to count how many stitches are on here and make sure that you don't have an increase. You just should have 21 at the end. So yarn to the back. We're going to knit this stitch in the back of the loop. So here it is again, slow. Yarn over, push that loop through, and let it fall off your left needle. So you've got that last stitch on there, turn around. We're gonna work on the second round of here. This is the second row. This one's a little trickier. This one is a purl in the back loop, and it feels like a little bit of a gymnastics trick here. So we're going to go into the back here like this, into the back of the stitch. Instead of approaching it from this direction, we're actually approaching it from this direction. So your needles are going to line up like this. Then you're going to take your yarn over, let it be in between these two. It looks like a beak to me. And okay, and this little bird is going to have yarn between its teeth. And so it goes through here, or between its beak. And then you're just pushing out a loop in the back and then let that fall off. Okay, so that's your purl stitch. Then you've got the knit stitch, so your yarn to the back, and then go through the front of this stitch here, yarn over, pull it through just like normal. Then you're going to want to purl again. So you've got to put the yarn front again. It didn't really seem like it on the other side because it was at the end. But now that we're on to the second stitch, or actually the third, we need to put the yarn forward, tilt your needles to the back, slip that through that hole right there. So they're parallel like that. Put it through the middle of those two like that little beak. And then let that purl on through the back of that stitch. Okay, yarn to the back again and knit that stitch. Continue in that stitch pattern until the row is complete. And this is a roving yarn, so if you see the yarn kind of splitting, be sure and kind of fix it as you go. Otherwise, it's going to give you some hang-ups. It's beautiful yarn. You just need to kind of watch what you're working. So we'll see you in a moment at the end of the row. Okay, you have just ended on a row 2, and this is significant because when you read the pattern, it says that you need to repeat the last 2 rows of twisted ribbing for 2 inches or 5 centimeters, and you end on a second row. So it's going to look like this. You'll have the long tail here, the ending of your working yarn here, and then when you flip this back around, you're on the right side again, and you would be starting anew. So just real quick to show you, this is going to be this kind of different looking Y-shaped stitch. When you flip it over here, it has that kind of V, classic V looking stitch. Once you get about 2 inches, you're going to notice a difference. So this is that ribbing, same kind of ribbing where there's a purl in between. This is the twisted stitch here, and on the back of the purl stitch, it's just a standard knit stitch here. Okay, so let's continue that on until you have the 2 inches or 5 centimeters, and I'll meet you back in a moment. We'll start on the next stitch pattern. Okay, we are ready to start the texture pattern. We have got the right side that we're on. We'll start the first stitch, and the first row is knit. We're going to knit all the stitches across, and pause your video and meet me back up for row 2. Before I finish row 1, I'm going to move my stitch marker, keep it on the right side, but I'm going to mark one of these purl stitches from the ending of our last stitch pattern. That way we can tell that any of the rows after this are the row 1, and then we can mark it every 4 rows we go up, because this is going to be a 4-row stitch repeat, okay, or row pattern. So we're going to go all the way across knitting, okay. Let's start row 2. The second row is knit 1. Okay. The next stitch is knit 1 below. So knit 1 below is when we take our needle and we look at the stitch that's on the needle, and then there's this previous stitch here, okay? That's that purl from before. This is the back side of the knit stitch below. We're going to go through that hole here, okay? Go right up through that hole. So we have 2 different loops on the needles here. So on here, and then it's on this other needle. We're going to wrap around and knit that stitch. Bring that loop forward here and let both of those just fall off. Then we're going to work the next stitch, and actually this is going to be a purl, so we'll bring the yarn forward, purl this next stitch, then we're going to knit one below again. So we bring our yarn to the back again, go right into this little hole here, okay, that's that previous stitch, knit, and let these 2 drop off, and then yarn forward and purl the next stitch. And you'll just continue this stitch pattern on until you have 2 stitches left on your needles, and I'll meet you in a moment. Okay, we're down to the last 2 stitches on the needle. We're going to knit 1 below again. Again, you're going right underneath here in this little hole, knitting it as normal, letting both of those stitches just fall right off. And then the last stitch, we're just going to knit. No more purling. Okay, so we've got that second row done. Now we're on to the third row, and you're going to knit just like row 1. So go ahead and knit this row, and I'll meet you back in a moment, and we'll go on to the 4th. Okay, we're on the 4th row, and all you're going to do is purl this row here. So we're going to just go all the way across, and you'll know that the purl row is always the side that doesn't have that stitch on it, the stitch marker on it. It's going to be the ribbing that has the V knit stitch, you know, that where it looks like a V, it's not all twisted, so it looks like pretty standard, right? And you'll get to know the back of this stitch really well. Let me show you in my sample over here. After it starts working up, this sample starts looking like this. So you end up having a whole bunch of purl bumps on the back. And then the front side will look like this. So meet me back in a moment and I'll show you what this looks like after just one full repeat of the stitch pattern. See you in a moment. Okay, we're back. We've done 4 rows in this stitch pattern repeat for the texture stitch, and you'll notice that this has gotten just a little bit wider here. It's spreading out, and on our larger sample you can see how this goes in, this cuff here, this edging, and then it sticks out for the texture stitch. You can also not tell just yet on here what this pattern is going to become. In between these columns here, when you pull it out, you'll see this knit stitch, this purl stitch appear right before these knit stitches. That's going to repeat again. So when you look on my larger sample that I've continued on, you're going to see these purl stitches in between. Whenever there's this a knit one below, it makes it pop out. So you've got this protruding stitch here that makes this really pretty bumpy pattern. So you're going to continue on as called into the pattern and knit your inches, so you will need to measure that. Let's go ahead and show you how to measure to make sure your gauge is right. Most of the time when you're working on your rows, it says that your gauge is supposed to be 24 rows per 4 inches, but that's not necessarily something that you have to worry about. It's mainly the width on the stitches here. So we want to make sure that you're getting 12 stitches per 4 inches. So I'm going to measure across 4 inches here. I'm going to go to the beginning of this V column here, these V stitches, these knit stitches, and I'm going to go over to where my line ends over here on the 4, and it's right before this next stitch here comes. So I've got 1, 2 in this column here. So this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So I've got 12 stitches across in a 4-inch area. That's right on gauge what I need to be. And all I need to do is worry about knitting to the length of that I need in the pattern, not how many rows I need to knit up. So that's how I know that this gauge is correct. So the other time I mentioned that you're going to need stitch markers is in the pattern. It calls for needing to hold some of those stitches, so you may have to bind off a few. You'll want to know how to bind off, just a standard bind off, or you can bind off in pattern. And then when you start taking stitches off to hold them, say you've knit a few, then you just kind of scoop up and pick up those stitches like that. So that's how you take stitches off your needles, and you might hold like a certain amount of live stitches and then work on the panel however the pattern calls. So that's what you would use in that instance. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial today and that you end up making your sweater. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you again for joining us. On behalf of yarnspirations.com and GoodKnitKisses, I'm Kristen Mangus, wishing you happy knitting. Bye-bye.